Hi guys. So this is to walk you guys through four different poems, and the first is "The Road Not Taken" by Robert Frost, which is an extremely famous poem. A lot of times people read this poem as sort of this hopeful analogy about kind of choosing different paths in life, and it is that. But a lot of times people miss sort of the central theme or message of the poem. So we're going to be looking at the sounds and how that helps kind of shape the message or theme of the poem. So you'll see that there's five different stanzas in this poem, and four different stanzas of five lines. And the rhyme scheme is pretty straightforward. It's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, C, D, and so on. And there's not a conventional meter. It is a little bit different between lines, but you'll see the sort of end rhyme, and you'll see sort of these different elements throughout. So just listen to the language when you first read this poem. So, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So you have this even though it's not the exact same meter on every line, you do have a steady rhythm, and you get this sort of beating and moving forward kind of very steadily. And then you see that the traveler essentially comes to a point where he looks at two different paths, and the paths are very different looking. They're equally as attractive, they're just different looking. So he sees one that is fair as the first. It's grassy, it's not well trodden, there's not been a lot of people who walk down there. And he says, though as for that passing there, had really worn them about the same. So he looks at both roads, and he sees that he decides to go for the one that is less worn. So he decides to go for the one that is less trodden and less taken by most people. And then he says, oh, I kept the first, the other one, for the other day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So he knows that choosing one path over the other means that he is pretty much set on that path for the rest of his life. And this is where a lot of people miss it in the fourth quatrain. They think that this is sort of a nice, pleasant view of going down one path. But what he's saying is, I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. So I'll probably, he thinks, regret this decision ages down the road. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So when we look at the structure of the poem, we see that there's three stanzas which really kind of focus on one idea, and then the turn comes in the last poem. And you see that him kind of flip the sort of expected outcome on its head. So he took a path, but he's not saying that he's necessarily been happy with that path. He's also not saying that he was upset with it, just that he took the road less traveled, and he will probably be telling this with a sigh someday. So beyond just the rhyme scheme and the meter, I want you guys to notice a few different things about sort of the internal rhyme is very important in this one. We have this very calming sound that is put forth in the poem. Lots of round sounds, so yellow, wood, sorry, both. Lots of vowel sounds that are being put forth. And there is some key alliteration. There's some key assonance that's kind of happening. So, for example, if you took this line right here where he says, two roads diverged in a wood, and a lot of vowel sounds being put together. And he says, and then you have the pause. He says, I took the one less traveled by. That I repeated is a very comforting sound. But that pause put in by the hyphen is very important because it suggests a pause in the decision. So the way that he's structuring this out loud, when you pause your voice, when you pause to take a breath, kind of suggests deeper meaning within the poem. So I just want you to notice kind of these vowel sounds that are being put together. There's some assonance throughout, and some internal rhyme that's very important. So that's The Road Not Taken. We're going to do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night now by Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas, this is a poem that's essentially very famous. It's about not giving in to death. And again, we have this alliteration, this assonance. It's really important. But we also have this internal rhyme that creates this very euphonic sound. So, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So we have a lot of these round sounds once again. And we have the internal rhyme with rage, rage against. That would have been read sort of with a long A sound. And then he says, though wise men at their end know dark is right. Again, you have those consonant sounds kind of being put close together. Because their words had forked no lightning they. So we have a little bit harsher sound than we did say in The Road Not Taken. This is something that is combative. It is something that is pushing against a force of nature, essentially, and it's a fight. It's a battle. It's something that is violent. And fighting death here is something that creates the sound that is very harsh and stark against the ear. So kind of pay attention to these sounds, these T's and these K's and these D's that are kind of happening here. Do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying now. You can keep reading, but essentially he's kind of pushing this image of fighting against death as death is threatening to overtake you. And it's a battle and it's violent. So wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it's on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see the blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. So again, you have both assonance, and you have alliteration. Blind eyes could blaze. Let me see why I won't quite go under. I can't quite get the rest of the poem. I apologize. Let me go to the internet really quickly. Here's the rest of the poem. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gaze. And we have the refrain. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And again, notice the end rhyme here. So we have sight, gay, light, height, pray, night, light. So the rhyme scheme is fairly regular. You do have an extra line. We have these tetrains, essentially, but we do have an end rhyme, or an end quatrain, which suggests something is different. So it says, and you, my father, there on the sad height. So we now have the speaker speaking to this unnamed listener, his father. Curse, bless, father being, of course, his God. Curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle to that good night. Rage, raging and dying of light. So father could be either his literal father or the metaphorical representation of God. And this is where it's slightly different. So we have him speaking about himself here rather than speaking about the audience or the silent listener. So he says, and you, my father, there on that sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So I'm going to close out of this here. We're also going to look at a poem called The Windover by Gerard Manley Hopkins, who I honestly had not studied deeply before this. And he is a Victorian poet who was deeply religious. He actually was also incredibly creative. He wanted to be a painter, but felt that it was too expressive for someone who wanted to be religious and put God first. So he found his outlet in poetry, and he was actually one of the premier poets of the Victorian era. He gave it up and left for the priesthood, and his poetry was not published until 30 years later by a friend of his. So this one I think is really interesting because you have some clear alliteration happening here. He says, "I caught this morning's minion." So again, we have alliteration immediately with MMM. Morning minion, kingdom of daylight's Dauphin. Dauphin is another word for a French king. So we have this massively impressive figure in this bird, as we see, the dappled drawn falcon. Beautiful language, beautiful alliteration, and you'll see that the form it's not free verse. It does have form, but it's not exactly a end rhyme or any rhyming structure. So you see in his writing of the rolling level underneath him, steady air and striding, high there how he rung upon the rein of the rippling wing. So again, we have all of this alliteration. We also have some soft alliteration happening with high there how he rung in his ecstasy, then off forth on swing. So he's saying this massive, beautiful falcon. He spotted it while he's out in the morning, and he's kind of relating the falcon's majesty with divine majesty. And the falcon kind of is skating off on the wind, and he's impressed with the mastery of the thing. It says, brute beauty and valor, and air pride plume here. Buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, oh my chevalier, which is like a knight. So he's attributing sort of these allusions to courtly life and courtly structures. So we have kings, we have dauphins, we have chevaliers, to the falcons. So he's saying that he's essentially the head of this courtly structure, which is an allusion or a metaphor for Christ over his kingdom. And at the end he says, no wonder of it, Shareplod makes plow down Sicilian shine and blue bleak embers ash. Ah, my dear. So this is a Sicilian is a shovel. So he's saying, these like earthly wear and tear makes everything kind of dull. He says, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold of vermilion. So the last one we're going to do is on being brought to Africa brought from Africa to America by Phillis Wheatley. Phillis Wheatley was a woman who was captured as a slave from Africa and sold to a family called the Wheatleys, and they were very kind to her, and they actually educated her and helped her learn how to read and write. And she was always incredibly grateful for them, and a lot of her poetry has to do with race and gender, but it also has to do with kind of an understanding of Christianity and how she attributes her Christian faith as saving her. So she almost, in a strange way, sees being brought as a slave to America as a blessing for her soul. So her audience here is that she's speaking to really two different audiences. She's speaking to white audiences because she did actually present to white audiences. She's also speaking to other former slaves or who are sort of in the same bonds that she was. She says, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land." So pagan is very important there. She's attributing a lack of Christianity to the African continent here. And she says, "Taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and there's a Savior too." And these are allusions, of course, to biblical God and Jesus. It says, "Once I redemption neither sought nor knew." So listen to those sort of round sounds that are happening there. Neither sought nor knew. We have sort of this internal rhyme that's happening. And she says, "Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye." So she says, some people look at Africans as this, look at their skin color only, and they're negative towards it. She says, "Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train." So she's saying, beyond the skin color, all of you who doubt, we are all of the same. And she says, we all may be saved essentially by the same God, whether we are black, white, African, American, doesn't matter. So look at the end rhyme here. Land, stand, to, new, I, die, cane, train. Very simple rhyme scheme, but it is highly effective here. So that is sort of a focus on sound, and I want you guys to go ahead and move on.